Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric on our long-running series, the Unported Playlist, where I take a look at my favorite unported arcade games of all time. And today's video is not going to be one of them, because we're looking at side-by-side released on the Taito JC hardware, because it is Unported Janktoberfest, and Taito is here again. Now I will say that this isn't a completely bad game, it's just part of that era of 3D games where developers were having growing pains because they really hadn't worked in the medium of 3D that much, and side-by-side is a result of that. Now to be fair, emulation of the Taito type JC boards is a little bit rough, and this game does not run at full speed, so what I did was I actually changed the timings in editing so that you're seeing closer to what this game would normally run like, but it still doesn't run great. It's fun, I guess, but it's just that era of 3D where developers weren't still sure how to handle it. Now, if you've been watching my channel, you know I love janky 3D stuff, and if I could find a side-by-side board for cheap, I would 100% buy it. It definitely has a very early PlayStation 1 vibe to it, except the textures are perspective correct and there's really not a ton of warping going on. So in some ways it has more capabilities than the PlayStation 1, and in other ways it looks like a really ugly version of PlayStation 1. But as far as janky 3D is concerned, that is the sweet spot, and that's why the game's on the list. Because it might not be a good game, it might be completely janky, but I still have a soft spot for it. And I will say the handling mechanics are relatively decent. You can drift okay in this game. The car still seems to turn from like a center pivot point, and the back end likes to get out from underneath you a lot. The physics don't really feel like a real vehicle, but what is here does make sense, and the racing is relatively good. There's going to be a lot of bump and run. Trying to get first place is quite hard, but it can be done. And at least on the graphical stylings, all these poppy colors kind of has a big Cruisin' USA vibe to it. It's got these deep, vibrant colors, almost like a neon red going on, and you do get some 2D leaves popping up into the screen as you drive by them. This game definitely had a lot of effort put into it. It just happens that that effort doesn't really go anywhere. And I love when you cross the finish line, your car just comes to a dead stop and the camera rotates around. That it is very jarring. But at least the dioramas of the levels look pretty good in 3D, and you do get a good car selection, and they're all licensed vehicles. So you can tell that Taito definitely spent some money, at least on acquiring the licenses. And again, the emulation on this game is not great, so I'm not really making fun of it. It's on unported jankless because it looks janky AF, and I really do enjoy that. I know I make jokes a lot about loving janky 3D hardware, but I remember this stuff in arcades back in the day, and I just really enjoyed playing it. It felt better than what we had at home, and I definitely collected a lot of it. But I can't say that Side by Side is a good game. And there is a sequel, and there's a compilation on the PlayStation 1 that kind of combines both games together, and it's not any better than what you're seeing here. At least in this mountain stage though, the course layout is good. I will give Taito credit for that. There's a lot of switchback turns, it gets very narrow, you need to be perfect on your driving, so once you actually get a handle on the game, it does give you some decent challenge. Sometimes the roads feel a little too narrow though, like when the cars are trying to go by you, it feels like it's slightly just trying to mess with you. But hey, you get a nice tunnel. I mean, that's always fun, right? Tunnels in driving games. It's just hard to talk about games like these, because you can tell that they tried, and this is the second time that Taito showed up on Unported Janktoberfest, and I probably could have included all 4 games from them, but that just didn't really feel fair. But you will see when we get to that little snowy area, the handling mechanics on the car do change, and that back end really wants to go out from underneath you. And it's another thing, they definitely coded the physics in to try to give you that versatility. Now one thing that I can't strike the game for is the soundtrack is relatively decent, and the car engine noises sound pretty good. But honestly, you know, racing up this ravine here, seeing the cars in the distance, it has a vibe. I'm there for it. Is it a good game? It's definitely not. But like I said, Taito was at least really good at making music for games outside of Dino Rex, so go ahead and listen for like 45 seconds and I'll come back and talk more about the game. Enjoy!
Extended time. Extended time.
So yeah, the soundtrack is good, and I really love these cherry blossoms here and that pink on the screen. I give the designers full marks for using fun colorways, and you can definitely tell this is supposed to be Japan just based upon those cherry blossoms and kind of how those gas stations look. And it's very interesting. It's not surprising that Taito didn't make a very good game with side by side, because this was the advent of 3D. Taito and Konami both made a bunch of janky 3D racing games before they got good at the concept. Seems like Sega and Namco didn't struggle though. Sega's first attempt, Virtual Racing, is just an incredible game. It might not be to the same graphical level as this hardware right here, but you can go back to that and really enjoy it. Something like this game is a historical marker of its time and place in 3D development for arcades, because this is bespoke hardware. Sure, it's using an off-the-shelf processor, but a lot of the parts on this board were designed just for this one specific use, and it does look like that. It is a very interesting look, and you have to remember, all of the developers at Taito were probably getting their first, if not second, use out of 3D hardware making this game. Everyone, grew up on developing for 2D hardware, sprites and 2D layers, and now suddenly there was a third dimension and polygons in the mix, and that probably confused a lot of people. But once you get into the third person view, the game looks relatively okay. Sure, the ground texture is absolutely a pixelated mess, but if you don't look too closely at the side scenery, it doesn't look too bad, and that's definitely something that you can be happy about. And again, these dioramas look spectacular, and Taito put 5 whole courses in the game, so they were definitely trying to give you the most bang for your buck. This doesn't seem like a cheap, quick game. It just seems like a game where the developers were struggling with the concept of what to do with 3D in the first place. But every once in a while, this game will shine, and you will see that Taito was on to something with it. Now, this snowy course is near impossible because the handling model basically throws you into the wall. But every once in a while, you're going to be able to make a drift around that entire turn, and you're going to see a good racing game rear its head amongst the jank. Sliding around this corner here, trying to drift in between these two cars, bumping them, that all feels good. The issue is when you actually try to brake and turn back, your car just does not want to take that line, and you end up bumping into the wall here. But for like 10 seconds, there was a really good racing game coming out of side by side. But go ahead and give the soundtrack one last listen, because I do think it's relatively good, and I'll come back and talk more about Taito's history with 3D and my overall ending thoughts for side by side. But enjoy, because the soundtrack isn't too bad. Hey, it's jazzy and fun and it works. Part of the reason I'm doing Unported Janktoberfest is because these were games that I did want to talk about, but when I say some of my favorite unported arcade games of all time, they didn't make that list, but these are all still really important games. Because if you didn't grow up in this era, you missed when 3D was basically invented for gaming. And there was a time before 3D existed. I've lived through it, and a lot of the early 3D was just kind of ugly and weird like this. But again, one big drift around that one turn, and a good racing game shows up. If you want to try side by side, it emulates decently. There is a PlayStation 1 compilation version, which is definitely cut down, but worth checking out. But that's the thing about 3D back in the day. People need to invent it whole cloth because they'd never seen it before, and side by side as a result. Short of that, leave me a comment down below. Tell me if you ever played the game or if you're planning on playing it after you watch me spin these donuts. I'll be back next Monday with more jank, and I'll have videos throughout the week as well. See you guys next time. Bye bye.